Welcome to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. In our last lesson, we used strictly geometric shapes to create architectural designs. We also used symmetry to make sure it was completely balanced on both sides. In today's lesson, we're going to the opposite extreme. We're going to be using only organic shapes instead of geometric. And we're purposefully not going to make our picture balanced, where it's the same on both sides. We're going to have it different on both sides. Today, we're taking a look at a sketch by a famous painter named Winslow Homer. It's called Oranges on a Branch. Do you see any geometric shapes here? Do you see symmetry here? I don't think so. The leaves are all twisted and looping in different directions. Even the oranges aren't perfect circles. They're lumpy, squashy, ovally bits. So this lesson is going to focus on three things: organic shapes, asymmetry or not symmetry, and overlapping. Let's make sure we're good on those three terms before we get started. You've practiced organic shapes before, so you should know what that's all about. Remember twisty, bendy, bumpy shapes instead of straight lines. In our last lesson, we talked about symmetry, so you know what that means, and asymmetry just means not symmetry. So you should be good with that. Just make sure your pictures aren't the same on both sides. And that third term, overlapping, simply refers to when one thing is in front of another, covering up what's behind it. Let's get started and figure out how we're going to use those three things in our picture. So just like Winslow Homer, we're going to have all of our branches coming in from one side. We don't want on both sides because we're not trying to make it symmetrical. We only want to have branches coming in from one side. They're going to come in from this side. That way we'll have a not symmetrical picture. When we start drawing those branches, we need to make sure that they are not straight, right? We want organic, bumpy branches. We don't want to use geometric shapes. We're not going to use rectangles. We do want to give it some thickness, right? I don't want to just have a line. I want to have it have some thickness. But think about how branches on any kind of tree are going to have some bumpiness to it. You know, it's going to have bark, it's going to have twists and bends, and it's not going to be straight, and it's not going to be, like a rectangle. Also notice that it comes to a point at the end, right? Then we also are going to need to have branches coming off of the branches, right? So I can pick a point where I want a branch coming off of the main branch, and then, right, that's going to split into even smaller branches, right? There's going to be lots of branches here, right? Play with it, have fun with it, and there are going to be times when things overlap, right? One branch will overlap in front of another branch. And so, you got to think about which one is in front, which one is behind, and you might need to do a little bit of erasing depending on that. So like this branch comes in front of the one behind it. So I'll erase the one that's behind it. Let this one be in front, right? And, this is kind of my main branch. Maybe there's another branch coming down in this way. Again, we're being very free and flowy and bumpy and twisty-bendy and letting those branches overlap each other. Once you're done drawing a couple of branches, we're going to move on and talk about the leaves and the oranges that would be hanging on those branches. So, you all know that different types of plants have different styles of leaves. So we need to look at an actual orange branch to see what those leaves look like on an orange tree. Notice that they are long and single-pronged leaves. They're not like the ones with 3 little prongs or the ones that are shaped like mittens. These leaves are, one single strand. And they're nice and pointy at the tips. So when you draw these leaves, they should have a small stem that comes off of a branch and then turns into a nice, smooth, round, curved leaf and has a point at the end. Now, leaves typically have little veins that run through them. So you can draw those lines now, or you could wait until we're using color and add it then. I might have made that stem a little too thick. The stems are going to be quite narrow. They're also going to be quite a bit smoother than the branches, right? The branches themselves are going to be bumpy and bendy and twisty because they're covered in bark, but the stems of the leaves are probably going to be much smoother. All right, so we need to draw a bunch of those though, right? We don't want to just draw one leaf and call it done. We want to draw a bunch. Now what I've done here is something that we call cropping, where I've drawn something that goes up off the edge of the page, right? This leaf, it's a big leaf. I didn't shrink it down to make it fit. I just let it go off the top. And we'll add the little veins in that leaf. More leaves. Draw a bunch of leaves. And remember, just like with the branches, we need to keep in mind overlapping. There are going to be times where a leaf goes in front of or behind, right? So maybe like if there's a leaf coming off right here, it's going to cover up part of these branches underneath behind, right? So I'll erase the bit of those branches that are behind it. Anytime you're overlapping, you need to make sure that you only see the one that's in front. All right. On the other hand, right, if there's a leaf coming off of this branch, when I draw it behind here, I don't need to draw them both. I can bump and jump, right? So I draw the leaf until I bump into this branch, then I jump over it and I keep drawing the leaf. Again, I'm drawing a leaf, I bump into the branch, I jump over it, and I keep drawing, right? And that way I didn't, I could have just drawn that line through it and then gone back and erased, but it's quicker and easier to skip that step, right? That's what we call bumping and jumping. It's an easy way to overlap things. Anyway, draw a whole bunch of leaves. You'll also want to add some oranges, but let's spend quite a fair amount of time working on the leaves. We don't want to just stop with 2 or 3 leaves. We want lots and lots of leaves, and we want them coming off of all of the branches. We want our leaves to overlap each other. We want there to be lots of different directions, right? Because they're getting blown in the wind, and some of them are hanging, and some of them are standing up tall. And so we want lots of leafy stuff going on here. And when we start to draw oranges hanging on those branches, we need to think about gravity. Gravity is going to pull those oranges down. They're not going to stick up above. You're not going to draw them up on top of the branches. Like I wouldn't draw a big orange up on top up here because they're heavy. Gravity pulls them down. So we want them to be, underneath the branches, but we also don't need them to be perfect circles, right? A lot of times people get caught up on saying, well, I don't know how to draw circles. I can't do it. That's too hard. Well, let them be lumpy bumpy. They're not gonna be perfect circles. See, that's kind of squashed or bumpy a little bit. Let it be that. That's normal, that's natural. Remember, these are organic. We don't need perfect circles. Also keep in mind that the oranges are going to be connected to the branches by a stem. There is going to be a stem that connects from the orange to the branch. A lot of people are going to say that it looks kind of like an apple. If you make a big dip in the top and have that stem come into a big dip in the top, then it will look more like an apple. But we're not doing that. We're keeping it more rounded. And it'll look more like an apple, more like an orange that way. Also, when we color it, we'll use that to help it look more orange as well. So we need a bunch of oranges. Usually, you're going to see them in kind of clumps or groups. So like I'll have maybe another orange here. This is kind of a hard place to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do this again somewhere else on the picture too. But you see how there's two overlapping there. One orange behind the other. They're kind of close. Maybe their stems would even come. Maybe I could even make their stems kind of come from a nearby parts of the branch, right? Sometimes, like there'll be clumps that, they grow together, right? Anyway, let's see that again somewhere down here. Maybe I'll have an orange here hanging underneath this branch. It's going to be, it's going to be behind this leaf, but it's going to completely cover up that other leaf I drew there. So let's erase that leaf that's behind it. Whoa, throwing my pencil here. All right. And then I'll have another orange, another circle-y shape right here with it. See how they're kind of lumpy, right? Let it be a little squashed. And then I'm going to have their stems kind of go to a similar part of the branch, right? Their stems kind of come together here. Okay, the oranges aren't always going to come in twos, right? Maybe they'll come, there'll be some that are by themselves. There'll be some that come, in a group of three. And so here, let's see, I'm going to do one by itself back here. This is further away, so it's a little smaller. Or maybe it's a younger orange. It's not as, not as big. It hasn't grown as much, right? They're going to be, some of them are going to be different sizes. And I don't know, maybe I'll have one hanging off of here. I'll go ahead and draw a little stem hanging, and then an orange right in this area here. And I'm going to erase all the bits of stuff that are behind it, right? I got an edge of that leaf behind it. I've got this branch behind it. I've got the base of that leaf behind it, right? Because overlapping. Yeah. And once you've got some oranges in there, you might want to go back and add some more leaves. You might want to go back and add more oranges. You might think, you know what? I want a couple more. Maybe I want another orange here, hiding behind this leaf. You decide. how many oranges and how many branches and how many leaves are going to work for yours. I'm going to stop here and start adding color. Now, it would be super easy to, you can use crayons, colored pencils, markers, whatever you've got. But it would be super easy, and it's super tempting to just grab 3 colors, just say there's a color for my leaves, and there's a color for my branches, and there's a color for my oranges, and just color everything with just those 3 colors and then say I'm done. We're going to actually dive a little deeper into it than that. We're actually going to do a little bit of color blending. Now, if you're using markers, colors don't blend as easily, but crayons and colored pencils will both work really well for the blending that I'm about to show you. But first, let's put in the base colors, which are just these 3 colors, right? So what that means is we'll start by coloring the branches brown. Notice how if I'm using a colored pencil, like if I point the pencil straight down to color, I get these lines, but if I point my pencil sideways, I get a more solid area of color. And also notice that, like, if I'm pushing down, it's going to be darker, but if I'm softer and gentle, it's going to be lighter. Those are some things we can play with while we're coloring here. Keep in mind that the colors should not always be as dark as you can make them. So anyway, I'm just putting in a base layer of color here. My branches are going to be brown. My oranges are going to be orange. My leaves are going to be green, right? And then I'll come back in and add highlights and shadows and things that are going to help make it look more three-dimensional. Now, if you were to stop right there, I wouldn't hate you for it, because at this point you have figured out how to use organic shapes to draw something from nature. However, if you look here at like these 2 oranges together, that because there's no detail, no definition to it, no three-dimensionality to it, it just looks like one big orange blob instead of two separate oranges. And so adding some texture and some shading can really help to define individual shapes within this picture. So I'm going to take it to the next level. I'm going to do some highlights and shadows. Now there's some of that can be done with the same colors, right? So for example, like if I want the bottom side of this branch to be darker than the top, I can just push harder with my brown, right? And then, right, it'll look like, if you look at just this part, it looks kind of like the light's shining on the top and then it's darker underneath, right? And that can be effective, but what about highlights? Like if I want to make something brighter, how would I do that? I mean, I could, I guess, go back in with an eraser, but colored pencils, crayons, those things don't erase super well. What I'm actually going to do is find a yellow and either a blue or a violet. I'm going to find a blue. So I'm going to use the yellow in my highlights to make bright edges where the sun is shining. And then I'm going to use the blue to make shadows. Now, why would I use a yellow for the highlights? I mean, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, Mr. New. Couldn't I mix the white with my highlights when things are really bright? Mix a white to make that color brighter? And then couldn't I mix a black with colors to make them darker, to make shadows? Well, you could. You could. If you mix black with the shadows and white with the highlights, it'll work, but it'll kind of wash out the colors when you do that, and it'll make your picture look more gray. If I use yellow for the highlights, I could imagine there's a yellow sun shining onto these, casting a yellow light onto them. So the highlights should be a little bit yellowish. And then the shadows are going to kind of reflect some of the color of the sky around them. So that's why I would use a blue in the shadows. So in thinking about this, I need to consider which way is the light shining. Is the sun straight up above? Is it coming in from the side? Which way is the light shining on these? Just to make it simple, I'm going to make it all like the light is shining straight down from above, so that we can just think top and bottom. So for every object on my page here, I'm going to use a yellow right at the top of that object to make a bright, what we call a rim light, right around the edge, right at the top of every object. Okay? And then I'm going to use the blue to make shadows. And I'm not trying to make my branch here blue. What I do want to do is mix the brown with the blue, right? But by mixing it with the blue instead of mixing it with a black or just using it by itself, it keeps that shadow a little bit more colorful, okay? Anyway, you decide how important that is for you. But I think if you watch and you see how this turns out with highlights and shadows, you're going to want to do it too. So there, if you look at this branch, you can see that it looks more three-dimensional than these other branches down here because of those different values from light to dark and using the colors to make the shadows. I'm going to do the same thing in leaves and in my oranges, and I'm going to leave half of it without the shadows and half of it with the shadows so you can really see the difference on the same page. So what I did there was I used the yellow in the highlights, the blue in the shadows, and then I blended it all together with the brown. For the oranges, I'm still going to be using the same highlight and shadow colors, but I'm going to use the orange to blend it together. So again, bright highlight on the top. The top of this orange is going to have this bright yellow mixed into it. The bottom side of this orange is going to have some of this blue mixed into it. I don't want to push too hard with the blue. I don't want to make it too dark, just enough to make it look shadowed. And then right now it's a bit much, but if I come back in here with my orange and really mix my orange into it, then it'll work out really, really nicely. And where I've got two oranges that overlap each other, it's going to be a good idea to put a bit of a shadow between the two. So around, like where they overlap each other, where this one's in front and that one's behind, there's going to be a little area here where the front one casts a shadow onto the one on the behind it. And then there's also going to be the shadow at the bottom of both. And the same with some leaves, right? Like if I choose this leaf and I just, brighten up the top of it with a yellow and darken up the underside with a blue, and then mix it all with my green. And there, look at how much of a difference that makes with this part compared to this part. So if you really take your time and do some highlights and shadows by thinking about where the light is shining, and then the opposite side would be darker, it'll really make your picture look more lifelike. But if you didn't get that far, if all you did today was make the organic shapes and organic lines to use to create these orange branches, then that's a good start. That's it for today's lesson. In this video, we learned how to use organic shapes, not symmetry, and overlapping to create a picture from nature that looks like a tree. Our oranges on a tree branch were inspired by a famous artist, Winslow Homer, who also made oranges on a tree. In our next lesson, we're going to be mixing it up with using both geometric and organic shapes in our pictures as we learn how to create a silhouette landscape. I can't wait to see you then.